In this video, we'll learn about some of the basic concepts for Azure virtual machines and how we can create our own virtual servers in the Azure cloud. And so with Azure VMs, what you're essentially doing is you're running your own virtual servers in Azure. You're going to create virtual machines that are going to run on physical hosts and hypervisors inside of an Azure data center. And so what we're getting here is infrastructure as a service. We're going to get all of the necessary infrastructure to run our own virtual servers. We're going to be in charge of managing the operating system and doing patches and installing applications and doing updates. So these are virtual machines that we are going to manage. They're running inside the Azure infrastructure, but we have to manage these VMs. And the VMs are going to require block storage. So in Azure, we call these disks. And these block storage volumes are like virtual disks. So if you think about a physical computer has either disks or maybe SSD, but it has one or the other. And it stores all of its data and all of its applications and operating systems. All that stuff is installed on block storage, either in the form of a hard disk or an SSD. Well, a virtual machine that we create in Azure is really just like any other virtual machine. It's going to need storage capacity, and it's going to need block storage in order to install applications and hold the operating system. So we will see when we do our upcoming demo how to create those virtual disks. And also, I just want to mention that Azure virtual machines are an unmanaged service. This means that Azure is not going to handle any tasks within your operating system for you. So it's not going to do things like Windows updates. That's up to you because it's an unmanaged service. So when you create a new VM, and we'll see this demonstrated later on, but one of the things you'll choose is the image. And the image is basically going to be how you choose your operating system, and there's many different images that you can choose from. So we're going to use an Ubuntu image in our demos, but we could choose other operating systems. We could choose images that have pre-installed applications as well. And then you'll choose a machine size. And depending on the machine size you choose, you'll get specific amounts of CPU and memory and certain amounts of network performance and storage throughput. So it's important to choose the machine size that properly fits your needs. You don't want to go too big because it's more expensive, and you don't want to go too small because it won't work that well. You want to make sure that you're right sizing your virtual machines so that you're getting the right performance, but you're not overpaying. And that's important because all of the different machine sizes are going to have different prices based on their performance characteristics. So the more powerful a machine is, typically the more expensive it will be to run that machine per hour. So when you create an Azure virtual machine, it's important to right size. And the virtual machines that you deploy can be deployed to one specific availability zone, or they can be deployed across multiple availability zones, or they can be deployed in what we call a virtual machine scale set that will automatically add and delete virtual machines as needed. Those are concepts that we'll learn about as we progress deeper into this course. But at a basic level, here's what we end up with. There is a physical host running in an Azure data center, and that physical host is owned by them, and it has CPU and memory and network connections and storage, right? It's got the 4 food groups that virtual machines require. These are the resources that my VMs are going to need. And the old way of doing things, the really old way, before virtualization came around, is we would have a physical server and we'd install the operating system right on it. And that operating system would get access to all of those resources. But that's not what is going to happen in an Azure data center. They don't give you a dedicated physical host. They run a hypervisor on top of that physical host. So if you run Hyper-V on premises, or if you use VMware and you run ESXi on premises, that's a hypervisor. All of the physical hosts in the Azure data center have a hypervisor installed on them, and when you create new virtual machines, those VMs are going to run on top of that hypervisor in the Azure data center. And they're sharing resources with all of the other VMs that are running on that same physical host. So what you might end up with here, or what you probably will end up with, is your virtual machine might be running on the same physical host as a virtual machine that's owned by other organizations. This is one of the things that happens with virtualization, is you have a bunch of VMs that share a common set of physical hardware, common CPU, memory, network connections, storage. And this might be problematic for you. You may have regulatory requirements that don't allow the sharing of hardware with other organizations. Now, there are ways around that, and you can use dedicated hardware for your organization, but it's much more expensive to do it that way. So by default, when you create a virtual machine within Azure VMs, it's going to run on a physical host in their data center, along with virtual machines from many other Azure customers.